week 7. All right, so these are the slides I'm using for, I'll use later when I meet with students, but I'm recording the week 7 overview video a little in advance, and you'll see my jokes this week are that you spend a lot of time talking about nature or nurture, and I hope that after those assignments you really came to the conclusion that it's never nature or nurture. It's almost always nature and nurture, or some combination of it. We're going to see, maybe there's a few things. So we're going to review some of what we worked on last week. I want to remind you here on the course page, we are on week 7 and next week is the blue tent break. So I'm hoping that everybody is caught up by October 13th, and that is a holiday in the US, and then the late policy that's in the syllabus will go into effect. So please, you have week 7 and then a whole week before we get to week 8. So make sure you're getting yourself caught up. In week 7, that we're going to focus still really on the biological perspective, but switching a little bit, we're going to talk about what is consciousness. We could go down such a rabbit hole with this topic. I find it so very, very interesting, but we're going to stick to what's on the exam because we could go in many directions, which will include looking at how do we define consciousness, how are we impacted by drugs and addiction, what does that do to change consciousness, also sleeping and dreaming. You're going to read this week about the dream journal assignment so you can start collecting your dreams, but you're not going to try to finish that this week. There's a little fun activity. I hope you haven't seen it before. It's very interesting, of testing your awareness, and then you're going to start next week and then come back to it after break is sensation, right? And sensation, psychologists always lump together sensation and perception. Sensation being what happens at the level of your senses. So think of the 5 senses you learn about when you're young. And then perception is what happens in the brain. All right, so that's what you're going to focus on this week. But I kind of like using the first activity of the week to kind of review what you did the week before. So that's what we're going to do. And there's 2 things going to be on here. There's the assignment where this video is posted, and you'll upload your notes from this video and some of the activities. And then I really want you to be able to discuss with each other. So there's part of what is from this assignment for Monday is going to be to watch. It's an 11-minute video. It's not long. It's very interesting. And I have some questions that you can choose which one you want to discuss with your classmates. And my apologies, I am a little bit sick, so my voice is kind of cracking, and I'm sorry about that. All right, so what do I want to do? We just talked about late policy starting. That's done. I want you to review once more the brain structures, because the more you review this, the more you're going to remember it. I have a little case study activity for you to work on. We're going to talk about nature versus nurture, question mark, right? Should it really be versus? And then you're going to just use this video called The Divided Brain. And there's some discussion questions that you'll work on. All right, so the first one here is you're just going to pause this video here. And there's 3. There's Anne, the landscape artist. There's Crazy Eddie, a professional wrestler. And there's Jill, a student studying for a test. All right, and you want to see, you can bring your brain back up if you want, but you might just see, what can I do from my own memory? So I want to see, what do you remember? And I'll read your answers when you upload them. I'm not going to tell you the answers, but what parts of the brain are activated, right, in this situation, right? So do the 3. You have these 3 situations, all right? And just tell me, can you, right? Painting with her right hand, right? So if I was giving an example, so if she's painting with her right hand, that means there's something going on in the left side of her brain to control her right hand, right? That's one. She's listening to classical music. What part of the brain is activated when we're listening to music? So just go through and see if you can practice doing these, because it's a really good way to review the areas of the brain that we learned about. We want to make sure we're always coming back to this. So pause the video, write these things down, and then restart the video when you're ready. So this nature versus nurture debate. Nature, you saw last week, is our genetics, right? How do our genetics determine our personality traits and maybe why we act the way we do? And nurture is all the ways that which we've been brought up. And in the biological perspective, which we really are in right now, we're talking more about nature. But as we go through the course, we're going to talk a lot about nurture, right? We'll talk about parenting styles. We'll talk about different experiences that we have and maybe how those two interact with one another. And let's just see here. Can you do, I like Venn diagrams. I think they're an easy way to sort, make sure. So can you go through, can you pause, right? And here's some things. We got alcoholism. I don't know why I can't get this to be honesty. There we go. Honesty, eye color, accent, intelligence, Down syndrome, height, athleticism, political perspective, hair color, blood type, heart disease, shyness, right? Can you go through and see which of these you think are more influenced by nature, right? That would be on this one. Equally influenced by both, more influenced by nurture, right? Which is which, right? So go ahead and sort, and then pause the video so you can sort them, and then start the video up again and we can go. All right, so I'm going to go through as I give mine and pick the ones that are definitely nature, right? Your eye color. Oops, I don't know why accent got stuck in there. Let's see here. Let's get rid of accent and give it its own box. So eye color, text, accent. All right, so eye color, definitely nature. Accent, right? How we speak, definitely nurture, right? What language have we been exposed to? That's nurture, right? All right, Down syndrome is nature, right? That's a chromosomal abnormality that causes that. All right, height, it's definitely genetically controlled. I'm going to put it just slightly. It's not equally influenced by both, but our diet is going to really impact how tall we end up being, right? If you go back and you look at people who lived, you know, I don't know if you've ever been to a castle and saw the size of a bed for people who lived in the, you know, the mid 1800s, but they were shorter just simply based on nutrition. But given that it's not completely equally influenced, right? Your genetics plays a huge role in that, but there's a little bit of nurture. All right, what else do we got here? Athleticism, right? Probably quite a bit of nature, but I'm going to kind of start putting in there because it really depends on what happens, right? Heart disease, definitely equally influenced by both. There is a genetic component, but it's mostly related to how you eat. Blood type, not mostly related to how to eat, combination of both those two things. Blood type, that's genetic. Hair color, provided you're not dyeing it, genetic. Shyness is very interesting, right? Because this is, we'll learn later, is a aspect of temperament. And temperament is very genetic, but then there's the part that says what happens with that temperament, right? And so I would say it goes in the equally influenced by both, because it's a combination of, right, what were you born, what temperament were you born with, and then what happens in your life. All right, honesty, there's no genetics for honesty, right? It is what is going on in your world. Alcoholism, again, I think falls equally here. There is some genetic predisposition, but there's a lot about how you act. Intelligence, this is going to go, there is a little bit that we can do with intelligence from nurture, but so much of it is influenced by our genetics. We might argue about that a little bit, but I'm going to put it more on that side than the other. And political perspective, right? This is probably more nurture, although there are some tendencies that we can see again in temperament that lead to people being towards more political, liberal, or conservative. But this falls more on the nurture side. So see how you did. And I would be interested when you turn this in if you want to discuss any of these, right? If you had different opinions, kind of why you had them. All right, another thing you did last week was you were talking about this idea of, are we adapted for our environment? And again, we could probably come back to some argument of these things, of kind of the timeline of what's happened here on Earth. But this is kind of what your textbook is presenting and the ideas that the College Board uses. So I'm going to go with that. And if we take 4.6 billion years and we condense that into just 1 hour, we see the Earth's crust is formed as a minute, right? Inferred, right? We really don't know, but if we have some sort of beginning of life is early, oldest rocks preserved, right? First fossil evidence of algae cells, 13 minutes, first bacteria. Then we have a really long period of time, first cells within a nucleus, they think, right? First jellyfish is all the way up here. And in these last couple, right, first modern man is the 59.9, right? The very last. And so if we think about how long something needs time to really change, it needs a really long period of time if we're going to say that evolution has happened. So we can clearly see that, has there really been enough time for humans to have any genetic modifications that dealt with the environmental change? And really, no, there has not been any time. So when I posted that discussion, there's so many things that come to my mind of like, can we deal with like light? Like, are we meant to deal with the light that we deal with inside all the time, right? Does our brain really understand the light bulbs that we use? I saw some really interesting discussions the other day on sunglasses. Like, what happens when your eyes don't get access to the full range of light outside because you have sunglasses or transition lenses on all the time? Time spent inside versus outside, how much movement, how much noise we have, how we sleep. Like, there's discussions of whether sleeping through the night was ever something that humans did until the past, basically till the onset of electricity, right? When we had to actually keep warm or build a fire. There's lots of discussions to show that humans probably went to sleep about dark, woke up for a little bit in the middle of the night, and then went back to sleep until daylight, right? What about novelty, right? The idea of new things. Like, are we really meant to have so much newness in our lives? And what happens when we're constantly seeking out new things, right? The age in which we are considered adults, right? How does that impact how we think about ourselves? That we're not, 100 years ago, I read Little House on the Prairie to my children, and 15, 16, you're an adult, right? 12, you're expected to do. What we eat, when we eat, how many people we see. Like, our brains can know about 150 people. So what does it mean to walk around in the streets and see lots of people you don't know? What does that do to our anxiety levels, right? Our chemical pollutants, the medications we give, all these things are questions to ask. Can we, should we really be dealing with all these things that are different, right? And so it actually brings me to this really interesting video I posted. This is posted in the discussion for you, right? And we've always had this idea of right and left brain. And one of the things you need to understand very clearly is that the visual area on the left hemisphere, right, it goes to the right visual field, right? That this is, we call this the switch in the brain, right? Goes through the corpus callosum, that we deal with stuff opposites, right? Which is something we know. There's also been so many different discussions about what the right side does and the left side does. And I think this video does, number one, does a good job of clearing that up, but it also brings to us some really interesting questions, right? So I want you to pick one of these questions. You don't need to answer all three, but as you watch the video, you're looking for, how do the roles of the left and right hemispheres differ and how they perceive and interact with our world? McGilchrist is the man who this video is made after his book. So why does McGilchrist argue that modern society is increasingly dominated by the left hemisphere's way of thinking? And what are the potential consequences of favoring the left hemisphere's perspective over the right in culture, education, and leadership? So I hope you can see that this really connects with this idea of, are we adapted to our modern life? And also brings in this, your knowledge you've learned about the right and left hemisphere. So it's not super easy to do, but I hope you find it as interesting as I do. So pick a question, and then in the discussion forum, I'll post this video, and you'll watch the video and you can discuss the question. So that's what I have for this week. I hope it was interesting for you, and if you want to discuss anything, please let me know.